Kallo Media.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Ebissa Ragassa. I'm the current president of OSA, Oromo Studies Association. This is our OSA's conversation series with the scholars. Our purpose in this series is to examine the fundamental question that continue to plague the Horn of Africa: how to move forward from chaos and crisis to stability. Dictatorship and instability have continued to rise in the region. Authoritarianism in one country has become a liability and hindering the progress of one Horn of Africa country from moving forward. To explore and tackle these fundamental issues, we will engage researchers and scholars in their field of expertise. The people of Horn of Africa have been struggling for freedom and share a common and similar aspiration to live under a democratic government. In this respect, we will focus on the current crisis in Sudan and the situation in Ethiopia. Both Ethiopia and Sudan are going through tremendous crisis, and authoritarians threaten to destabilize each other's country. Allow me to welcome Dr.Sara Abdul Galil. She's a pediatrician, mainly based in United Kingdom. She has worked tirelessly in Sudan, and she is worked hard and a pro-democracy advocate in Sudan, and she will be focusing on the current crisis in Sudan and what the situation is and why transition to civilian governance in Sudan is a challenge at this point. And my next panel scholar is Dr. Asebe Ragassa. He's currently a senior researcher and teaching fellow at the Political Geography Unit at Zurich University in Switzerland. His focus of study is developmental. He will be focusing on the situation in Ethiopia, the Oromo protest, the Galilo protest, and why the country is in crisis after and the failed transition or the stalled transition in Ethiopia and the impact that what that has in the Horn of Africa. Allow me to welcome both of my guests, Dr. Asebe Ragassa and Dr. Sara, to this program. Thank you everyone for coming. As you guys are aware, the situation in the Horn of Africa is tempestuous. The Horn of Africa is married in a lot of difficult situations. Authoritarianism is threatening the region to destabilize. But I would like to focus on Sudan. If Sara, you can give us an overview of what is happening in Sudan, some of the historical issues or contention issues that is taking place in Sudan.
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity. I feel privileged to be in this discussion. The situation in Sudan, and if I look at what has been happening, it may mimic other challenges that other nations in Africa are facing. And it is important to look at what's happening in Sudan and in Ethiopia and in other areas as one nation to learn from each other and try as well to build solidarity and build a democratic states that are stable. So if we look at Sudan since independence in 1956, it has been a long period of dictatorship that is following military coup, and then very short periods of democracy. And there has been no sort of opportunity for the Sudanese people to even practice democracy, debate, and learn how to accept each other. This has been even hindered by civil war in different parts of Sudan, south of Sudan before the separation, west of Sudan, Blue Nile, and eastern Sudan as well. The big issue and the big problem has been that there has been always a call in these times for the military forces to come and take over. And they have been supported by political parties in different times, in the 60s, in the 80s, and now. And that's following challenges that the civilian governments have been facing. So if we go back to 1989, in 1985, we had a Sudan uprising. We had 4 years of democracy, election. We have, been struggling with economical crisis. And then suddenly we had an assassination of our democracy by a military coup that is affiliated to one political party. And so this political party, although it was in the parliament, was elected, but they could not lead their debate. They could not engage with other political parties, and they forced their ideology by the military coup for 30 years. And along these 30 years, the resistance continued. Peaceful resistance and armed movement. But what is the different this time? The different this time that the Inqas, as we call it, the regime they built a parallel government. So you have the government that you know about, the main, Ministry of, Public Sector, but actually they had a hidden, invisible, parallel security forces, financial institutions, different, complete sort of government that is controlling the whole country. The update about Sudan at the moment, the critical development today is day 12, following a military coup, with no cabinet, with no constitution, and with an emergency state. The reason that has been put across by Al-Burhan that there is no political stabilization within the cabinet, and they could, the political parties are not able to deliver. Now, I think the main default or pitfall that happened, that in April 2019, following the historical peaceful resistance in Sudan and the revolution, we did not complete that revolution to the end. We did not go to a complete civilian-led government. We ended with a partnership with the security forces, and this was forced. So those who led the negotiation with the security forces, they have insisted on that this is the safest exit so that people will not be killed. And during the transition, we will build a national military force, one military force, and we will sort out all of the other militias, and we will restore peace in east of Sudan, west of Sudan, and Blue Nile. This was not the case. The people knew that. The people knew that, and the people's voice was not heard. And maybe later I will discuss that what is the gap between the people and the political matrix, who are usually will be the leaders, whether leading the negotiation, whether being appointed in the cabinet. There is a gap between what the people can see and what the people want and what the political parties and the political matrix think. And how can we bridge that gap? And how can the political parties in Africa reflect the people's voice, not their own voice? I'll stop here and maybe I come back later with other thoughts.
Thank you. I think you touched upon some interesting parallels with Ethiopia. Dr. Asebe, if you could briefly give us some of the main historical issues that Ethiopia had problem with in trying to bring a civilian or democratic governance in Ethiopia. And I think Dr.Sara shared a similar point that after the peoples fought for governmental change toward democratic governance, it has stalled and has been hijacked by authoritarian military wing Would you give us an overview of what the main historical problem in Ethiopia is that's preventing it or hindering it to form a democratic governance?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to be part of this conversation. And thank you, Sarah, for being with in this conversation. This is enlightening and giving us a very good insight about Sudan because of much of the similarities that we have also in Ethiopian context. To just mention a brief overview of the historical background about the challenges of bringing democratic transitions or democratic system in Ethiopia. I would say it goes back to the formation of the modern Ethiopian empire or the formation of the modern Ethiopian state in the late 19th century. Ethiopia remained to be the empire state. It was formed as an empire through conquest in the late 19th century when the northern Abyssinian kingdoms conquered the majority of today's southern part of the country, including Oromia, Somalis, Sidama, Olaita, and so many others. And that brought a kind of multinational groups having different language, different cultures, different religion, and so on. But it didn't recognize the presence of this diversity in terms of their culture, in terms of their language, in terms of even their right to resources. Rather, what happened throughout the 20th century, for example, until almost 1960s, until early 1970s, when the revolution came, was a system where one language, culture, and religion were imposed on the over 80 different ethnic groups. Then that made people to be resenting the system and then to resist the system. I will not go to what happened in all those periods, but particularly since the mid-20th century, around 1960s, then the resistance started to emerge against this homogenizing state building projects.
Assimilation, you're right.
Yeah, it was an assimilationist process, not only assimilating in terms of language and the culture, but also in terms of economy. It was exploitative. People were not having the right even to live and work on their own ancestral land. So the right to land, for example, the right to resources, the question for self-determination is started in 1960s, 1970s, and so on. Then that was, generally speaking, the question for self-government, which we could now say that they were asking for these democratic systems to be installed. But it has never realized, because through the popular resistance in the 1960s and 1970s, a revolution came out, but the military hijacked that revolution. And then the country stayed under military dictatorship. So the hijack of the revolution by the military became one of the big lost opportunities in Ethiopian possible democratic transition in that period. Then again, the movement didn't stop. Actually, many liberation movements, including now the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the Oromo Liberation Front, and even including Eritrea and many others in Somali, they were fighting against the military dictatorship in the 1970s, 1980s, until the military dictatorship, Mengistu Haile Mariam's regime fell. But relatively speaking, in the 1990s, the institutionalization of multinational federal system at least brought a much hope in Ethiopian community in general, and even for the world community also, that Ethiopia would transit into democracy, because there were the constitution as well as the system, the multinational federal system, at least installed some sort of democratic elements. The right to self-government of different groups came into being. Although the level of implementation and many other deficiencies were there, then at least these exercises, even including the right for culture, language, and so on, were put in place.
Right.
However, the EPRDF, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, in which the TPLF was the dominant, turned the system into more authoritarian again, and that brought actually the resistance, the Oromo, particularly the Oromo resistance, Oromo protest from 2014 to 2018. I think I will come to that more specifically later on, but in general, what can be said for your question is the challenge for democratic transition in Ethiopia was also that there were different periods of opportunities where civil movements brought the end to authoritarian system, dictatorial system, imperial feudal system. But unfortunately, that was hijacked by different actors, sometimes by the military, as 1974, sometimes by some actors who were more interested to different dimensions of consolidating power. And as we are also observing and witnessing now, the 2018 well-applauded transition was also hijacked.
Let me come back to the transition, because I think this is fascinating. Basically, Ethiopia was built as an empire dominated by one ethnic group, in which they have maintained a privilege in the bureaucracy and the military. And the people of Ethiopia, as Dr. Asebe mentioned, over 83 different ethnic groups have not enjoyed, the democracy, and they've been exploited. I want to come to, it's similar historically. I think the background is pretty similar. I want to come to a very fundamental question that a lot of our researchers, scholars are interested. Sara, what fundamentally prompted the civil resistance movement in Sudan? Was it an economic issue? Was it a political issue? Was it bad governance? What led the Sudanese people to uprise against this, the system in the country?
Let me just as well agree about the issue about diversity briefly, and that until now, it seems like as an African nation, we cannot celebrate this diversity and make sure that there is social justice among all different groups. It is one of the major issues that we are all facing at the moment. Myself, I have my ancestors, part of them are from Eritrea and from South Sudan, and I was born in Khartoum. So I don't know, maybe I would have been in Ethiopia, or maybe I would have been in Uganda, but here we go. So I think the Sudanese people are like, all of the other people in the world. We want to live in peace, freedom, and we want justice. And none of these systems provided peace, freedom, or justice for different reasons, whether there was a political, social, economical, peace, conflict. And each time there was a completely different story, but the end result is the same. So if we look at the last 30 years in Sudan, there was empowerment for those affiliated to the Islamists. You are pro this regime, then you will get progression in your career. You will feel safe, you will feel protected, you will be privileged. You don't support that regime, then you are going to be challenged, detained, arrested, lose all the opportunity. Then you become an activist, and you stand up against it, then you can face worse human rights violation. Now, if we look at all of these incidents, whether in Sudan or other countries around the region, I would like to ask a question. When did we have a positive transitional justice following a revolution, so that people can learn that if you do this, if you come and assassinate democracy, you are going to be, you will be held accountable. In Sudan, this never happened. Nimeri never faced any trial. He came to Sudan after a while, he stayed. Nobody, put him to trial about all of the crimes he did. At the moment, Omar al-Bashir, and we can't even send him to the ICC. And this group of security forces who are leading the country at the moment, they were against any sort of meaningful transitional justice to be achieved for the victims. And therefore, if my son is brought up in Sudan, he will believe that the power, and it's important to discuss this concept as well.
Right.
The power is always with the military forces. And there is undermining of the political matrix. I mean by that, the unions, the civil societies, the community groups, and the political parties. And that, it is not as important as being an officer in the military security. So this concept is a concept that is now embedded within our culture, and that we have to remove it. Yes, this is what they see. This is what they see. And we have to say that sometimes the coup is not always a military coup. We can have a civilian coup, and we can have dictatorship within civilian government. So we always say a democratic civilian state, because it's important to have democracy within a civil state.
Right.
I think one of the most important things is looking at corruption. And because corruption will prevent us from thriving economically, from being sufficient,
Right.
by being, and then when we are, we have economical crisis, this is when you find that we are under the ruling of other countries in the region, by participating in some civil war to be paid money, whatever this, country, whether it is in the Middle East or in Africa. And so until there is this sort of economical stability and we fight corruption, this is a major issue as well that will put pressure on most of the, I think, African states. When you come out from a dictatorship, a long-term dictatorship, and there is dysfunctional system, and you're trying to build your, the new state, there will be different powers to block you, and one of them is the economical crisis.
Actually, thank you, Dr. Sara. That actually brings us to the same question and the same issue. I think we may have to further look into the transitional justice that you're saying. I think that is an important concept that society needs to understand, and accountability is necessary for crimes and for corruption that you have suggested. Dr. Asebe, what prompted the Oromo protest, for instance, in briefly, was it the Galilo movement, as otherwise known in the country? Was it lack of democracy? Was it a question of constitution? Was it a question of federalism not being implemented properly? What are the key issues that prompted people to uprise against the previous regime, the APRDF?
There were different levels of analysis that could be put for this question. The first one is one can see from a more historical perspective. not the immediate cause of the Oromo movement or the Oromo protest of 2014, but the Oromo remained resisting the Ethiopian empire since the period of incorporation. That should be understood. And the question is, the Oromo has never been well represented, well recognized in terms of many things. I mean, there were marginalization, exploitations, and so on. And then there were political, economic, and many other questions and demands the Oromo have been raising throughout those periods historically. But if we see those particular cases which brought actually a fundamental political episode in Ethiopia, the 2014-2018 Oromo protest, this could also be seen in a very broader question of the question for self-determination in a way, or the question for autonomy. And that could be more elaborated in a way that Ethiopia, the Ethiopian constitution grants different nations and nationalities the right to self-government. But the question was the Oromo youth particularly, and the Oromo intellectuals then is spread to different sectors of the Oromo society, demanded the genuine and effective implementation of that constitutional right. That means, according to the 1995 constitution, the regional state of Oromia had at least autonomy in terms of governing the resource, in terms of exercising all other political and economic rights that are enshrined within the federal constitution as well as within the regional constitution of the regional state. But as I mentioned before, the EPRDF, which was the party that governed or ruled the country for 27 years from 1991 until 2018, it became authoritarian. It interfered from top down into not only into the regional states affairs, but into the local levels, individual level, individual rights, group rights, whatsoever were violated. So the Oromo youth particularly start to question the rights. They start to question such violations, demanding the right for access to resources, the right for dignity. They want to live equal with others,
right?
Not only for themselves, but they also want to see equality and democracy within the country. For other groups also to be implemented, to be exercised. So one can see there
were multiple issues that led to.
There were a lot of issues, but the immediate cause, as many people know, was the master plan, the expansion of Addis Ababa into the nearby sea towns and the villages, and that would inevitably expropriate farmlands and the land right of the Oromo farmers from that area, and then that had its own also not only economic implication, but also the questions of identity, the question of culture, and so on would be, because Addis Ababa was formed on the land of the Oromo, of the Oromo, and then it had the history of expanding, expropriating, and displacing the Oromo peasant from the 1880s onwards. I mean, until today. So such experience of exploitation and expropriation further triggered that when the master plan was launched, there was a very clear evidence from history that people would be displaced from their land. And the young generation know that it was not only the people who were directly affected by the master plan who protested, but because of this common solidarity, the Oromo from every part of the country protested against the regime and actually brought
down the regime, definitely.
Yeah, that was the immediate cause.
Thank you. And it's very interesting how the parallel between Sudan and Ethiopia in terms of the situation, because probably Ethiopia is behind 5 years in terms of crisis. Maybe Sudan is ahead, but the cause is similar, as Sarah, alluded to earlier, especially what Dr. Asebe raised, the master plan or the expansion, basically is the government or the regime used land through corruption and displaces the poor people and give it to those who are allied to it, part of the government. And so it's very similar. But I want us to, Sarah, I want us to go into a little detail now to give us a view, the current state of the transition. What is the current state of the transition in Sudan? Meaning, is the civilian government still active? Is the military in full control? What are the people doing right now? What is the way forward? What are some of the issues I've seen Sudanese people in diaspora demanding the intervention of the international community? They have written letters to the Biden administration to intervene. And I think they have also asked the UN to intervene to prevent the military from fully dismantling the civilian government. What is the state of the prime minister right now, if you have any information, and what is going on with this transition? Where has it failed? What were some critical steps that led to this transition from going forward?
Yeah. So we, as you said, and we have been discussing, we are starting in a very fragile base since the independence. Issues with social injustice and issues in regards to conflict and displacement and economical crisis. And then what is happening at the moment, that the prime minister is in home arrest, and 3 or 4 of his cabinet are as well arrested, and there are reports that they have been tortured. Not the prime minister, the ministers. There's no internet connection now for 12 days, interrupted. So we don't have all of the information, but on the 30th of October, there was a big protest in Sudan. About 5 million participated, not in Khartoum only, it was a nationwide. And the Sudanese diaspora protested in 50 cities around the world. The African Union suspended the membership of Sudan. So that is overall, and previously they did this. So it is a welcome step, but it's not enough. The European Union and the Troika, they have all condemned it and called it a coup, which is important diplomatically, but again, that's not enough. Yesterday, there was a special session in the United Nations, in the Human Rights Council, condemning the military coup and starting monitoring, but they haven't appointed a special repertoire, which we wanted, which is disappointing. In the Security Council, there has been a discussion, and certain players in the international communities are not condemning the coup and indirectly supporting the coup for their own sort of benefit as a regime. So I think there is an important issue about the story in Sudan. So at the moment, we have a security forces of different militias. And these militias, especially the Rapid Support Force, which is the Janjaweed, has been involved in crimes against humanity. And different other, national intelligence services have been, practicing this torture. As I said, the system was not dismantled properly, and nobody faced justice. And so they are back. This is a counter-revolution, okay? So they are back because people did not dismantle the previous regime while they were on the transition. I will come back to why this happened. But I want just to say that at the moment, the militia has got the financial power. They have the mining for gold mining. They have a lot of financial institutions. They have a lot of money when the country doesn't have money. Okay, so that's a big issue. And they have their own sort of government that I told you, the parallel invisible government that's now reappearing and functioning all over. We don't have a civilian cabinet at the moment. So there is no constitution because Al-Burhan have suspended major articles in the constitutional agreement. Basically, he has he just suspended everything that is linked to the civilian cabinet and the subtle return of the Transitional Military Council. It is worth noting as well that they suspended the investigation related to Khartoum massacre that happened in June 2019. So the way forward at the moment that the community, the neighborhood committee, the resistance committee are working by different ways. So today, for example, there is what we call the barricade night, where people are remembrance of the barricades and those who died in the barricade. And there are, sort of discussion, debate about how can we stand together. Tomorrow and day after tomorrow, there is the national disobedience. There are ongoing strikes. The doctors, different sort of professionals. There is a big issue that when the internet is back, we are going to, discover the extent of the human rights violation that's taking place at the moment. There are detentions, arrests. Where did it go wrong? I think what we have to realize, all of us, that when there is a long-term dictatorship, we all lose the tools and the skills of practicing democracy. And so when we come to build our nation during any transitional period, it is not just about building institutions like the public sector. It is about building the political parties, the civil societies, the unions to become democratic institutions, to learn to practice democracy. We came out from 30 years of dictatorship, and we have a big issue with the political matrix in Sudan. We had, a lot of division, a lot of polarization. There was no, lack of acceptance of each other. And as well, we came out from the 30-year dictatorship with this issue about being more linked to your tribe rather than being committed to your country. And this is another major problem in Africa, that because we don't have that system, we don't have the governance, you don't feel safe to go to the police station. There is no governance, there are no, accountability, there is no transparency. So you believe more in your small group, your tribe, against the other tribe.
Right.
And this is creating a lot of division. So we have a timetable, we're starting from scratch on peaceful resistance. Once again, there is a call for sanction for individuals, not for the country, for those who have led the military coup. It is very sad, and I have to say that, and because I think it's important, that some of the armed movement that were fighting for freedom, for peace, for justice, now they are part of the military coup.
Mm.
So they moved from art movement for peace and justice to armed movement with the military coup. And I think this is a big trick that we will all face if we have only armed resistance. Because if you believe it's the only way to gain your democracy, you can have later some sort of counter-revolution and, failure of establishing a democratic state.
Take us further a little bit, and I'll come to Dr. Asebe as well on this topic, that who are the regional, are there regional or international influence that knowingly or unknowingly supports dictatorship in the region? Who do you think are the friendly countries? Who are these pro-military countries? I know it's very difficult to name, but from our point of view, who are far away from a little bit from Sudan, there are some speculation the Egyptian government has a hand. The Eritrean government also is not helping. The Ethiopian government, being who they are not pushing or supporting, the pro-democracy movement. Who do you think has the major influence on Sudan, regionally or internationally?
So let me put it that way. Sorry. The influence and the friends are changing. In the last 30 years, we had friends who are becoming enemies and enemies who are becoming friends. And it is, at the end of the day, a major as well dynamic within the region. So if you look at yesterday in the United Nations, and you can see those who were apprehensive or rejected the decision to monitor Sudan human rights, you can easily know who are these people or who are these, countries, because it was 4 countries who raised their hands to say, we do not support this call, while all other countries in the United Nations were supporting the people of Sudan. Now, if you look at what's happening in the Middle East and the war in Yemen, and the soldiers being sent for a war that we have nothing to do with it, and the militia, the RSF, are paid for that, and therefore they will continue to be supported for this. Now,
sorry, are you saying Sudanese forces or militaries are being sent to a foreign country to fight?
Yeah, and the militias are paid for that. So they were fighting in the war in Yemen, and actually they are sending children and young people. There are reports published already. There is the other issue about the mine and gold mining with different countries, not in the region, that they are, they would like to control this, and that should be, nobody else have access for it. And therefore they are supporting this regime. Now, the issue with the River Nile and with the dam is creating as well more polarization, about the dam in Ethiopia and, the River Nile and Sudan and Egypt, and what should happen with this. And who should be supporting Egypt and who's supporting Ethiopia and where Sudan stands. And they forgetting that it's the people, whether they are in Ethiopia or in Sudan or in Egypt. It's not about those who are in the power. So what I'm trying to say and come back to is the political regimes that does not reflect the people of the country are creating their own agenda, and these agendas are pulling us away from working together and from reaching out to each other. We are looking at what's happening in Ethiopia. We were looking with Ethiopia a few years ago. There was a hope that there will be a democratic sort of state, and then we can see that things went back to square one. We are looking at Egypt and the revolution, and then the return of the military, ruling the country by the military coup. We're looking at South Sudan after separation. We were hoping that our brothers and sisters will have better lives than us, but they are not. Again, there is, an ongoing, arrest for democracy. How can we get out of this all together as a nation? How can we sort of break this curse and try to establish a democratic state? I believe that the most important thing is, standing in solidarity with each other, supporting each other. Justice is an important part. Establishing governance is an important part, and trying as much as we can to learn how to debate democratically our challenges and not revert to the military forces to sort out our issues. So I think it will take years and years for the African nation to reach that level. But if we start working together, maybe we can.
Thank you. That is very important. And I would like to, Dr. Asebe, to comment on what Sara has raised, that is the regional problem. Why the transition, especially in Ethiopia, had failed after receiving popular support from the people. Could we say that, for instance, the role Eritrea had played, both in interfering in Ethiopian politics and in the current transition, do you believe Eritrea had helped in stabilizing Ethiopia or the region in terms of the transition, is what I mean? Yeah. The reason I'm asking this is our fate, as Sara had said, the Horn of Africa, as was previously articulated, is becoming a club of dictators. And it's now becoming clear who these dictators are. So if you can make a brief comment on what Sara had said that is relevant to Oromo cause and issue.
That's true. To begin with, the kind of external dimension of the challenge to the to democratic transition in Ethiopia, well, there could be different actors actually in Ethiopia as well, or having interest on Ethiopia. But a very clear one, according to even the report by the United Nations Human Rights Commission a few days ago, and what we know from many reports from from international media and so on, the role Eritrea has been playing has been very destructive in Ethiopian affairs, particularly over the last 3 years. The best example is the war in Tigray now, that Eritrea launched a war in Tigray, in the northern part of Ethiopia, and it sent its troops, even including to other parties in Oromia as well. That means, as Sara mentioned very clearly, actors have been changing their position in terms of their interest. Friends changed to be enemies, and the enemies changed to be friends. That is how, particularly, the politics in the Horn of Africa becomes very complex. Eritrea was one of a serious state level. I'm not talking about the people-to-people relations, but in terms of the government's relation, the government of Ethiopia and the government of Eritrea have been enemies for the last 20 years and so on. But now it changed to be the best supporter of the regime in Addis Ababa, and playing a very serious destructive role in destabilizing the region. But this is the external dimension, but I don't really also only focus on the external dimension. in connection to the failed transition in Ethiopia. It was also internal to a larger degree. And one might say it failed, the transition in Ethiopia failed after the time that many people give to when it failed could be different. But for me, it failed immediately when the current prime minister came to the position in 2018. And the reason that what I say is that the movement and the revolution was given to a wrong person and the wrong actors. That was how it was handled. I mean, it was not only the prime minister who hijacked it, but the actors to whom the transition was entrusted was completely wrong in a way, because the Oromo movement, particularly the Oromo elites, the Oromo intellectuals, the politicians, everybody who involved in that movement, at least trusted those who pretended to be reformists within the EPRDF. And that was completely, from the very beginning, it was wrong, because these were the ones who were a kind of acculturated themselves to this political mentality over the last 27 years, since 1991, having a very centralized party system. They did not have any, if the last regime of the EPRDF was to be blamed, they were also part of that problem. So giving the transition to the people who were also part of the problem was the problem by itself. So that was one. But it is also very important to make this very clear. What happened? The situation is, when the transition through the movement, when it was given to the prime minister, and the prime minister was elected as, or Abiy became the prime minister of Ethiopia, the international community, the Ethiopian people, and everybody thought that would be, there would be a safe, a smooth transition to democracy. But what happened was, even different parties which were against the regime in the past, but having a very similar ideology, who wanted the system to be to return back to the imperial imagination of Ethiopia, which I mentioned before, joined hands with the prime minister and his party, the Prosperity Party, and then everything that has been done since then, in terms of closing the democratic spaces, in terms of closing the media, in terms of arresting and harassing opposition political parties, particularly those who were struggling for multinational federalism, this became a day-to-day experience. That means when we talk about it was hijacked, the transition was hijacked, or it failed, it was not a general, it should not be a general terminology, but it was a very specific, in a way that democratic spaces were closed. The issues are related to the media, access to media, free speech, and everything became very, very limited. But it was open for some actors who had a similar ideology with the party on power. Those parties were the ones which wanted to bring back the Ethiopia of the past. Mm-hmm. Ethiopia, the one which was assimilating different nations and nationalities, which was bringing only one, imposing only one language, one culture and identity, and even I would say that the war in Tigray by itself and the war in Oromia, these were the the manifestations of the war between multinational federal forces and the unitarist forces. Because the Prime Minister and his party, as well as many even other opposition parties who were on his side, were the ones who wanted to bring a unitary system, not about a unity of the country, but about a unitary system against the multinational federal system that others, including those in Tigray, in Oromia, and the South, were advocating for. So the transition failed because it went into the wrong hand. And that wrong hand were the forces which wanted to bring the imperial imagination of Ethiopia into the scene. So they were the ones who controlled the system.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How similar they are is just fascinating. It's pretty much a copy of what Ethiopia is going through, and Sudan is going through, and what Sudan is going through, Ethiopia is going through. Sarah, I know you have been in advocacy for a very long time, and I wanted to take your general observation. Some of the key things that made a difference in advocating for pro-democracy movement in Sudan. In your observation, has advocating to the international community made a difference? What are some key lessons that you have taken over the years by interacting with these international NGOs, communities? What are some ideas that you could share with us? And at the same time, if you could touch upon what does the future hold now for Sudan? Where do we go from here? What's next? I'd like to take your observation on that.
Yeah, very important, I think, area to discuss. If I can just make a small comment on the previous sort of discussion, there is a big issue, as has been mentioned, that the people who made the change, the revolution, you find them excluded. And those who lead the transition sometimes do not represent the people or do not listen anymore to the people, and they do not go back. So if you look at the Sudanese revolution, women and youth led the revolution. But if you come and look at the transitional government, there was a very big disappointment regarding women representation. Mm-hmm. There was big disaster about including youth, and therefore they were left out. And so this idea of inclusion, exclusion, will just bring me to the idea about who determines that you are an experienced politician to lead. Okay. Now, as a doctor, I have competencies. Without these competencies, I will not work.
That's true.
But in politics, when you come and look at the political parties in Africa, and with all due respect to you guys, I don't mean it, it is dominated by men in their 50s and in their 60s. Okay. There is exclusion of women, there is exclusion of youth. That has led that the fact that youth do not enjoy, do not trust, are not engaged in politics. Okay, and so those who are engaged in politics at the end of the day do not represent the people. And this is another area I think we need to work on, that getting engaged in politics is not excluded for certain group, I think, so that we can get a better representation. So advocacy and international community. I think the main keys about advocacy and international community for the diaspora, that within the diaspora, you should not represent your views. You should represent the people inside your home country. And that you are a voice, you are their voice, but you are not there to make up your own sort of intentions or ambition or interests. when you engage when we engage with the international communities, we did not engage only with sort of the British government. We engaged with the British government, with the parliament, so that all of the MPs, whether they are in the government or they are not in the government, can hear our voice and take our voice to the parliament and debate that. So there was debate about Sudan in Australia's parliament, in the Congress, in most of the countries over the world. And this debate will put whatever government under, the spot, under the light, because if they have their own interest, which is against the people of Sudan, people can challenge them. So it's not only engaging with the government, it's engaging with the parliament system. That is very important. Engaging with the civil societies that are interested in Sudan. That is important, that are interested in Africa as well. Engaging with the unions. So the Trade Union Congress, Unison, Public Sector International, they supported us. They brought solidarity from Latin America, from Asia, from all over. While the African countries, the governments, and other unions were very skeptical and kept quiet, and they're still keeping quiet now. Okay, the African people supported us, but the government and the organizations and even the civil society, not all of them, even the civil societies were very, very sort of cautious about supporting. And why? This is an important part that I would like to mention. Civil societies and funds and donation and corruption. So if we look at this, I look at the political matrix as 4 squares. One of them is the civil sort of societies. And that in itself, the civil societies have to move away from what the donor want to give me money, to actually think what they want and how they can, build a strong base within the country itself. And then you come to the community, normal people, in Europe or in America, it was very useful to get in touch and get them as well to be the voice and to support people of Sudan. It is very challenging regarding the media and journalism in the, outside Sudan, because some of the media and the journalism, some of the channels were actually against the revolution, and was mentioning that it is not a revolution, it's just few protests because people were hungry. And so learning about what are the useful channels, what are the strong sort of, journalism who can support the movement is very important. I think there are 2 things that made people support us: the bravery and the courage of the people inside Sudan, who faced bullets while they were protesting peacefully. And the other thing was unity. In 2018, 2019, there was unity among all of these sort of, pro-democracy groups. This unity, as soon as we just reached the first step in our victory, demolished. This will bring me to why we can't maintain unity. Why people always rush and run towards power. Okay, and the concept of power, in Africa and in other, I would say, the concept of power is not to serve the people, is to get the power to serve your political party or your tribe or your area. So this is why I say it. I'm not sure how many years it will take us, but I think if we work together, it will be easier and maybe smoother, that we will reach the area where there is a bit of stable, democratic, there is a safe civic space, let's say, and this a strong civic space that then you can move forward. I just want to end by saying, and I know people say it's different, but I don't accept that there is any difference between any African country and the American. So when there was the undermining of democracy after the election, what happened in America? The military, the national military forces protected the Congress. The Constitution held those accountable. And, you know, the media supported the people. Now, let's go back to Sudan as an example. We don't have a national military. We don't have a parliament. We don't have a constitution. Okay, so to fight what's happening is just the people of Sudan, inside Sudan and outside Sudan, and the media is all what is left. It is not, I wouldn't say it is, you know, it's an important aspect, but we realize that we have to do this on our own, once again.
Thank you so much. I know we have a few more minutes. I would like to, I want to pose the same question to Dr. Asebe in that, what is next for Ethiopia? What do you think, in your personal observation, I know things are quickly unfolding in the country, in terms of reviving the transition or other personal observation that you may have in Ethiopia?
Okay, thank you. Let me make one additional comment, which is very similar in the case of Sudan, about this issue of inclusion and exclusion of people who participated in the movements, in the transition, who brought the transition, and so on. In Ethiopia, what happened was the youth, particularly the youth, were the ones who were the leaders of the movement. The Oromo Kero and the Kare, they were the ones who sacrificed their life, their livelihoods, and so on. And there were also different activists, the media and everything, and the political party leaders who dedicated their time, their energy, their expertise to bring that transition in until 2018. But in the process of restoring and consolidating this imperial power, what the prime minister did immediately when he came to power was exclusion and the marginalization of the leaders of the movement. The youth, the Oromo youth, were excluded. Not only the exclusion from economy or politics, but they were also persecuted. They were given different names as if they were anti-democracy, as if they were gangs, and so on. So there were, some of them were, or thousands of them were arrested still now. Political party leaders were arrested, they are in prison. So on the contrary, those who didn't do anything in the movement, who were opposition parties simply hibernating during those 27 years, or sometimes only working on the media and so on, but without any contribution toward that transition, they were promoted because of similarity in ideology. That takes me toward this, what you ask it as what could be done. The issue is the pro-democracy forces should be recognized. Without bringing the pro-democracy forces into the center stage, the youth, political party leaders who believe in diversity, in equality, and in representation of different diversities, particularly within this multinational federal system. Without recognizing that and without bringing them at the center stage, we can't anticipate any democratic transition in Ethiopia. But this is still very difficult to anticipate within the current political situation, because the country is at a full-fledged civil war. The economic crisis is serious. Almost the state is almost collapsing. So these issues of recognizing pro-democracy forces would be something, the next step. The first and urgent step in this one is the war in Ethiopia should end by one way or another. Unless that war, the war in Tigray, the war in Oromia comes to an end, then we can't even think about this kind of promising aspects of democracy and so on. I want to mention one point. Wherever the power of domination prevails, wherever the power of this authoritarian system prevails, wherever people are silenced in terms of their aspirations, in terms of their interests and dignities, it generates the power of resistance. It doesn't completely eradicate resistance, and it doesn't make people to be submissive. Rather, it generates resistance, either in the form of non-violent resistance or in the form of armed resistance. These are inevitable. What is the best? It is those who are involved in this, directly in the politics, would choose either the non-violent aspect of resistance or the armed resistance. But the power of domination always generates and nurtures the power of resistance, and that is what we are observing in Ethiopia right now. Tigray is resisting, Oromia is resisting. In Benishangul Gumuz, the resistance is there. In Gambela, it is every part of the country there are resistance, and that resistance is against a very hegemonic, dominant system that is in the making, against the imperial system that is going to be restored in Ethiopia. This resistance is not simply resisting against a person, an individual, or whatsoever. This resistance is against a very hegemonic system, which many people had experienced it in the history. That hegemonic system had the history of excluding people from political participation. It had the history of exploiting their resources, the history that people were displaced from their ancestral land and so on. So they knew it in history. They experienced it over the last some decades ago, and they are now anticipating that it would be restored, and they resisted. So the future in Ethiopia is really frustrating, but with this power of resistance of any dimension, which I mentioned, I hope peace would win over this sense of hostilities and the war.
Thank you. My last question, I know there is a lot to go into. My last question for both of you, especially Sarah, is, as listening to both of you, what I have observed and learned is that there is now people uprising, organizing civil resistance in each country. There are cells being formed, people cells resisting against authoritarian. There is, even in Eritrea, there are people attempting to fight back, challenge the 30 or 40 years of dictatorship of Isaias Afwerki. In Ethiopia, we can see people are rising up and resisting authoritarian. Sudan is a similar case. How could the Horn of Africa build this relationship, network together, and amplify the people's voice and transition, maybe, or make the Horn of Africa a bit stable for the people?
So I think, first of all, is increasing awareness, and among youth, the generation that is going to lead the democratic change. I must say I'm very proud of the youth in Sudan. They were born under a military dictatorship, Islamic extremism, but they are now leading the democratic change. They believe in justice, in peace, in freedom. They respect diversity. So the awareness and the connection and the networking and, you know, feeling that you're not alone and the solidarity. I think the solidarity and standing together will automatically relieve and move away the other external and geopolitical factors from using one team or one nation against the other. It has to come from the grassroots. It's not something that is done in a, you know, conferences and suits and, you know, people signing agreements and it's about the people,
Absolutely.
the grassroots themselves, by connecting and now with the, you know, globalization, I think it is going to be easier than before. The other point that I've mentioned before, and I believe in that, is the understanding of politics, and that politics is not something that is limited to a certain club or certain group, and that, you know, people have to understand and practice politics. It's not being in a political party. It's, you know, you care about your country, the future, about your family, about your neighbors, about your daily life. This is politics. Okay, you don't have to be a politician, and being part of it and having a voice and whatever you participate, any participation, you know, is useful. It brings people together. And this is what we found during the revolution, is the networking, the participation of grandparents, of youth, of even children. Everybody felt like they were part of it and they were contributing and interested. Why? So we eliminate that club, because there is a young chap who died during the revolution, one of the martyrs, may he rest in peace. His name is Abdussalam Kisha. He said, it's a quotation now, all we worry about are the elites, the politicians who will come and take over and then disappoint us. And this happened, okay? So to prevent that, I think the grassroots, building a strong grassroots, building, you know, good awareness, good advocacy about pro-democracy. I'm always for peaceful resistance, and I'm very concerned when it comes to armed resistance, because, as I said, sometimes this may lead to further, but obviously I cannot make a judgment on that. I just want to end by saying that we need all to respect each other. We have to all believe that we are one, you know, humanity, and that we all deserve the same. And I would like to end by what my father told me in the 80s, and that, you know, when I remember that now, I just understand what he was saying. So there were a lot of refugees at that time from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and with the war, and we were having a discussion, and he said to me, this happened now for Ethiopia, it will happen for Sudan. At some stage, I'm really worried. And so when we look at our brothers and sisters, we have to be supportive and kind, because when we are there, we will need their support. And I think that's for me is an important, I would say, you know, I hold to what he has told me all the time, that we are going to go in these circles and we're going to exchange rules. And if we don't help each other, if we don't respect each other, if we don't treat each other that we all deserve the same freedom, peace, and justice, then I don't think we can move forward.
Profound statement. Thank you. Your closing remark in terms of how to build a relationship in the Horn of Africa so we can fight dictatorship, Dr. Asebe, and then we will conclude this series.
Yeah, Very briefly, I concur with what Sara has said. The grassroots networks and the grassroots initiatives are very important. I want to add that it's very important to understand or to have understanding in every part of the society in the Horn of Africa that people who are resisting against authoritarian systems in their respective countries share much in common with others across the board. That means these values of freedom, the values of dignity, the values of equality, these are what many people, many societies are aspiring and struggling for elsewhere. Those in Sudan are struggling for equality, freedom, and dignity. The same is true in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in South Sudan, elsewhere. So this understanding is very important. But how to do that is we should also at least have a kind of network at the level of media, for example. Our media in Ethiopia should be able to bring out things in Sudan to the Ethiopian people. What are the values and what are the demand and aspiration of the Sudanese people struggling for? And the same should be true for those in Sudan. So when the media plays a very constructive role in enlightening people, society about the interests and the fundamental questions of those societies in the other part of the region, a kind of this sense of imagined community will be established. That people would start to feel that, okay, there are other societies also in the Horn of Africa who are struggling with the same demand that I'm doing here. So if a certain problem arises on the other side, then there would be a kind of recepting the people, as Sara mentioned about the refugees and so on. So it is going beyond this structural level of politics. What the politicians talk about the Nile, about the regional politics or whatsoever is not very important for the ordinary society than this value that they adhere to about the questions of freedom, about the questions of equality and dignity. So I think at civil society level, at media level, at even intellectuals could also be able to, as we are now making a conversation, we should be able to talk together, to learn from one another. Our scholars from Ethiopia should learn about the Sudan, about Kenya, and the same could be true from the other side. So I think in that way, when in such ways, the power of the people could prevail over the power of the politicians and the elites. That is how I would say the authoritarian regimes could be resisted and could also be defeated in such a way when the power of the people prevails. You are muted.
Okay. Thank you so much for both. I know this is the beginning of a conversation, and I wish the people of Sudan best, and I know they will come over this challenge because they have done it before and they will continue to do so. And when they have people like Sara on their side and other good people of Sudan, they will prevail as a matter of time. Sudan has held a very special place, especially in Oromo people. A lot of Oromo leaders, when they have a very difficult time, they have escaped to Sudan. In fact, they see Sudan as their second country, and Sudan holds a special place. And we have a special respect for Sudanese people. They were there in our difficult time, and we hope we can build this relationship going forward. The experience that the Sudanese people are going through and the Ethiopian and Oromo people are going through are pretty much similar. We have one common problem, and that is dictatorship. And we want the people of the Horn of Africa to live, as Sarah said, we are all human beings. We deserve democracy and dictatorship. And so I want to thank both of you for coming on board to discuss such a topic. And I will touch base with Sarah going forward and see how things are going on in Sudan. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It means a lot for us in Sudan as well, for this solidarity. And I will share the video. I think I've learned a lot today from this discussion, and I'm looking forward for further sessions.